study computer security?
Among other things, yes.
And what does that look like?
What does computer security look like? Well, I think about all the ways there are to get into somebody's computer and do bad things to it, and then try to figure out ways of stopping that.
Are there lots of Earthlings that are trying to get into each other's computers?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
What are they looking for?
Well, for example, are you familiar with the concept of money?
I've heard of it. We have big plans for getting Earth rich.
Ah,
We're
okay.
going to sell spaceship rides once we get there.
Mm.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that's a lot of work. Okay, so what you might want to do is find some way of easily stealing somebody else's money. And since people manage their money on their computers, somebody who breaks into my computer, for example, might be able to steal a whole bunch of money from me.
But that would violate their consent.
Is this something you can help us with?
You mean to help you do or help you prevent?
No, help us do, definitely. You're an expert in this.
Yeah, I know some things about it. I've never done it. I've never actually done it myself, but I know some things about how you could do it.
We'll make a note.
Okay.
So there's a lot of bad actors who want to violate each other's consent on Earth?
Yes.
Wow.
But cybersecurity has always been a problem, or it's a problem now more than ever.
The more computers there are, the more opportunities there are for somebody bad to do mischief with them. And one of the things that humans don't seem to be able to do is to stop themselves from using computers, even in places where it's a pretty stupid thing to do.
Like when?
Well, for example, I now can buy a toothbrush with a computer in it and a connection to the internet on it, so that I can monitor how well I brush my teeth.
That sounds useful.
Well, yes, but it also comes with all kinds of potential interesting security risks.
But with the toothbrush, are people storing money on their toothbrushes?
No, they're not going to store a toothbrush. But what they might be able to do is the toothbrush might constitute an access point through which they could then, once it's connected to what we call the internet, they might be able to go to somebody else's computer through the internet through my toothbrush, or they could pretend to be my toothbrush.
But if money is digital and somebody steals your digital money and you have it in a digital bank, can't that digital bank just cancel the digital transaction that has happened in order to keep your money safe? Like, is it possible to create a world where people commit crimes and then things are just undone afterwards?
Sometimes. So, for example, if I write let's say I have a photograph, and it's a photograph that you don't want me to have. So you can come into my computer and you can destroy it. You can turn it into nothing. Okay. If I have saved a copy of that somewhere else, then I don't care. Then you've just wasted your time, and I can just go to this other place where I've stored it and just and replace it. So in that sense, that's possible. I can undo the effect of your crime. But in other cases, it's not so simple. Because the way electronic transactions of money are concerned, if you take money out of my account, it has to go somewhere. I mean, that's what it's supposed to behave like real money. And so if you're taking my money, you have to put it into some other bank. Otherwise, if you just make money disappear and nobody gets it, that causes people don't know that's a very serious problem. People don't know how to deal with that kind of problem. But normally, when you steal money, you want the money and you get it. So sure, the bank could reimburse me for that, but then there would be 2 copies of the money around, and that's not good.
Hold on, is there anyone who actually wants to just steal money and burn it?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too. Is this a radical method for income redistribution on your planet?
Is it a new kind of terrorism?
Yeah, this seems.
Well, one could argue that it's a new kind. A lot of people worry about financial terrorism, so yeah, do worry about that.
Has it ever happened before that someone has broken in and just torched the money in an account without taking it for themselves?
Turn the ones to zeros?
Yeah.
I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that. I think that my guess is in those cases, as I think it through, I think the problem is that you don't know if the other guy just torches it, if he doesn't deposit it, right? So then you're not sure what to do.
Sure, it just kind of.
You don't know, and so. I know my account has less money in it, or what was 100 is now 0. But I don't know whether or not the right thing to do is just to increase it, because then I have to take it from someplace else, and where would I take it from, or what?
But is it true that money can just be created in your country? So couldn't that money just be reimbursed by like the federal government or something?
That's a philosophical question, though, right?
That's right. That's
the
right.
Government could reimburse it, but then someone has it in their account, and so
right. And the government has to get the money from someplace.
Well, do they?
Well, that's right. In principle, people, the government can just print money, but that if you just print money, then it makes the value of everybody else's money less.
Interesting.
Sure. And so cybersecurity is mostly about money, or there's other things?
No. That's just one part of it.
Sure. Okay?
So, for example, I see 2 creatures in front of me. One of them is all white. One of them is brown and white. Do those colors have any significance for your, on your world?
We can pick them out. Our parents picked them out. It's pretty much a designer universe where we come from.
It's a stylistic universe.
I see. Okay. So there's no significance to it. Okay. But on Earth, there's on Earth, people who look different also often hate each other.
Whoa.
Which is a kind of must be a weird thing for you, right?
We're trying to make sense of that.
Well, if you figure that out, let me know.
We will.
Okay.
So people might want to try to look like someone else? Is that what you're saying?
No. Well, that too, but no, that's not what I was thinking. One could send messages to each of those 2 parties who hate each other and get them, for example, to fight with each other.
Oh, well, so this is something that we've talked about before, right? We talked to Dr. Schneider about this in a previous episode, where that's more warfare that's not about computer security, that's more about the security of the human spirit.
The cyberspace.
Well, I mean, there are people who think that the human brain is like a computer. Okay.
Well, they used to think it was like a machine when they had only machines. So this seems more like a reflection of the time.
Well, yeah, that's right. That's right. But there, if you want to just push that analogy a little bit further, there are weaknesses in the security of computers that the computers that we know about, that in principle we know how to fix, but nobody knows how to fix the vulnerabilities, the security weaknesses in a human brain. Human brains are easily misled and come to the wrong conclusion.
Well,
and sometimes a bad guy can take advantage of that.
Right. And you mean to cause violence, to cause disruption, to...
Well, to cause the two people to want to for example, to hate each other more.
Divide and conquer kind of thing.
That's correct.
And this occurs on the level of groups of people more than it does on the level of individuals, right? Like you're not at the point yet that hackers are forcing, some person to go and attack their neighbor because of...
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, there have certainly been instances in which messages on the internet have caused people to kill themselves.
And you think that comes from concerted hacker campaigns, or that's just...
I mean, you have to tell me what you mean by a hacker. If my email can accept email from anybody, for example, messages from anybody, and I've set it that way as I normally would want it to do because I'd like to talk to people. And then a whole bunch of bad people want to send me really nasty messages that depress me and scare me and so on. Maybe that would change my mental state into one where I would want to kill myself. And that has happened before.
And I suppose...
And then you have to say, well, how do you stop these people? Okay. You could cut it off. You could turn off your computer.
Yeah.
Yes, you could do that. You could do that, but then you lose the benefit of talking to all those people that you do like.
Right.
Okay. And so then the problem is, how do you differentiate the bad messages coming in from the good messages coming in?
But that's a personal decision, right?
Well, but who's going to make that personal decision for me? I can't do it because that means I have to see all of it, just good and bad. So that means I want to delegate it to something else. Or someone else. Who am I going to delegate it to? My mother?
Because the bad is painful, or?
Well, yes, and it hurts, and it makes me, and it changes my mental state.
But it might cause you to make better decisions to look at the bad too, right?
Let's say somebody threatens to kill me and tells me that I'm worthless.
Maybe it would be good for authorities to be alerted to that person.
That's the question. Now, right. So now, yes, that could be a good idea. So now, what do I have to do? Now I have to get the authorities involved.
I mean, not so they can be like outright removed from society, but you might want to keep an eye on threats. Like, I assume that's something you're...
Yes, that's true. That's true. But then again, there are a lot of people who don't particularly want the authorities looking at what they do, just on principle.
Right.
Do you want somebody watching everything that you say?
But this seems like a relatively easy thing to fix through some kind of artificial intelligence algorithm that can filter messages.
Why? I mean, if people can't do that filtering perfectly, why would you expect a machine to be able to do it better?
But they don't seem like they're really doing it. The challenge of the machine and the challenge of the human are different, right? The human can't filter those messages because when they look at them, they get a sense of, oh no, I don't like what this message says, and so I don't want to have to look at them, and so I don't filter them because I don't want to have to look at them. But for the machine, it seems like you would be able to program it so that, okay, any message that has hateful language, and you seem capable of programming machines to understand what hateful language looks like. Any message that includes that just gets thrown into the dumpster.
I don't deny that it's possible to do some of that. Machines certainly can do some of that. But the fact remains that nobody knows how to do that perfectly.
And who gets to make those decisions of what's hateful?
Well, you could train your own algorithms, right?
Well, if you train your own algorithm, that means you have to have a good set of bad information, of bad stuff as well as good stuff, which means you'll have to deal with it.
Which is why it seems healthy to face the bad stuff and learn how to.
Well, I mean, in principle that is a good idea. I think that every person who ever goes online ought to be able to help, ought to know enough to keep themselves safe. I think that is true. As we say on Earth, the best way to keep somebody from drowning is not to put fences around swimming pools, but rather to teach the person how to swim.
Yeah,
And that is definitely true. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't put fences around swimming pools. I mean, so we should to keep people out. But the best way is to teach the person to swim. I really believe that. Nevertheless, there are some people who are incapable of swimming.
Well, there's a lot of interest there. I mean, you might not want bodies piling up in your swimming pool.
That's also true.
Even if, ultimately it's that person's choice whether they drown or not.
Correct. That's also true.
So it's kind of understandable that you wouldn't want the internet to just become this chaotic mess. Like, it makes sense you'd want it to look more like a garden than a weed pile or something.
That's right. And a lot of people think that it's more like a weed pile.
Briar patch, I guess, is the
Briar
term.
patch,
or something. That's right.
Still learning English.
But that's one of those things that was sort of in the design of the internet, right? Because there was the option of making it anonymous, and there was the option of expecting people to register with their real names, and it came down to anonymity, right?
Well, originally, the idea behind the internet was that it would get a message from point A to point B.
For researchers.
And it didn't matter what the message was. And if you wanted to lie, you could lie. That was the design of it. And then if you wanted the other person to prove what their real name was, you would establish some sort of arrangement with the other person so that they could prove it. But the internet itself was never designed to provide anything but delivering a message from A to B.
Do you think that the internet is designed, period? Or is it just sort of emerging at this point?
I'm not sure what that means. There are certainly technical standards for how computers communicate with each other, and so and those standards get changed from time to time, and they get changed very carefully.
But they sort of iterate based on what's practical or what works. It's sort of an evolution, or is there somebody who's actually regulating this in an autocratic sense? Like, is there a designer of the internet?
There is a group of that's actually a much deeper question than you think. It turns out that right now there is a group of people, and it's basically a group. It's essentially a group of volunteers. Of people who get together and they decide sort of by consensus what the next generation sort of should look like.
Wow.
Who are these people?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, who are these people?
Anybody who shows up to one of the appropriate meetings, and the meetings are well publicized over the internet. But they're very technical. You have to know a lot about networking and so on. But out of this process comes comes standards for what it means to deliver a message from point A to point B.
Go ahead.
What are the interests of the people who are designing this? Is it purely technological, like they're sort of like engineers trying to make a better infrastructure? Or are these businesses that are interested in protecting their assets, or wealthy individuals, or what sort of forces are shaping this process?
Up until now, mostly it's been engineers trying to do the right thing. Now, you could make the argument, one could, and many people have made the argument, that a bunch of technical people shouldn't be making decisions that affected the whole world. And that nations should get involved, and governments should get involved, and so on.
That usually makes things better.
Depends on the government. Huh?
Does your world have the concept of sarcasm in it? I can't tell.
It does. It's our favorite human attribute.
We love Earth humor.
Okay. So the question is, if the government is it going to be better? Is it going to be better when governments get involved? And I would say no, but Part of the problem of government private sector relationships is that government thinks that it has a responsibility to control everything, and there are those of us who try to make them understand that no, if you try to control everything, you're gonna kill it.
Well, this is grounded in a sort of historical sense that if the government doesn't regulate certain processes, that other inhumane processes might emerge, you know, like the history of factory labor in your country or something like that. I guess I think these fears might be based in something very concrete, perhaps.
Usually not when it comes to technology. Government doesn't know how to regulate technology, because one of the interesting things about the way in which you regulate new technologies, you can't regulate everything. So you can only regulate those things that come to your notice.
When they go
things
wrong.
and things only come to your notice when they get big and something goes wrong. But if it's just a technology that affects a couple of people, nobody cares. Nobody in government will care, and they will not try to get a handle on it. When the internet becomes big and huge, then government starts to pay attention. But then it grows so fast that government didn't know how to get a handle on it properly.
But it seems like it has started to go wrong, right? Where you have this sort of psychological warfare that's happening on the internet.
Yes, that's true.
And there's the toothbrushes that are coming online. So it seems like by the standard of the government gets involved when things go wrong.
Right, that's right. And then the question is, well, things go wrong. Will government make it even worse? That's an interesting question, and nobody knows the answer to that.
And what would that look like for the government to get involved with the internet?
For example, it could start setting regulations it could start mandating that people communicate in a certain way. Is that the technical standards be of a certain shape and character?
Like linguistically?
Yeah, sort of.
Or functionally?
It would no, linguistically, that it would specify a vocabulary, it would specify a grammar. That everybody would have to adhere to. And of course, when you have the power to specify both the vocabulary and a grammar, you have the power to regulate communication.
It seems like a lot of these problems, though, have been dealt with in the past because people aren't willing to say things in public that are going to get them in trouble. But the anonymity of the internet has sort of allowed them to behave in their worst possible way. Would you agree with that?
There is evidence to suggest that is what you just said is often true. So yeah, I do believe that sometimes. Absolutely, it's well known that people will say things anonymously that they won't say when their name is attached to it.
I guess I just feel like it's a lot simpler to just de-anonymize things than to try to regulate every single word that people say. It just seems like an easier solution.
But there's value. There's certainly value in anonymous speech. Not all speech has to be identified with somebody.
We've been talking
like
about
whistleblowing?
this. Yeah, like what's the value of anonymous speech? It's nice to have a third person around to.
Well, so for example, let's say I'm working in an organization and I see my boss doing something wrong. I want to report it to somebody in authority.
But do you need an anonymous social media account to do that, or can first do you acknowledge that maybe I might want to report it anonymously?
Definitely.
Sure.
You do acknowledge it. Okay. Then you're fine. Then if you acknowledge there is some value sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes in some kind of anonymous speech, then the only question is, does it go in what forums should that anonymity be protected?
Totally.
So if it's just a question of forum and method of communication, social media or a letter to the editor of the paper or something like that, we could have that discussion. But I would say that speech is increasingly moving for a variety of reasons to electronic media. Mm-hmm. And take the limiting case, pretend there were no other media around, there's no newspapers and so on. That's a terrible world, but let's imagine that for a minute. What happens in the case, let's say 99.9% of speech is all electronic, okay? Now are you going to say that there shouldn't be anonymous channels there? That's very hard to sustain.
I mean, it seems like the corporations are increasingly incentivized toward best practices because they don't want to be burdened by situations that need to be whistleblown on in the first place. And it's conceivable that those corporations would set up channels to anonymously report corruption. And perhaps the government would also experience a similar incentive because they don't want their country to go down the tanks.
The question is a lack of anonymity on the internet, right? The way that people communicate with one another, synonymous with a lack of anonymity in the entire sphere of all communication ever, right?
Right, I just posited that the answer was yes by definition, but only by definition, because I said that imagine a world in which most speech is online, is on the internet.
But there's even so the internet, online and the internet are different things, right?
Well, I was trying to simplify that. If you want to elaborate on that, I can, but tell me what you mean by that.
Well, so the online world is the World Wide Web, which is this largely consumer-facing interface where there's hyperlinking between pages. Social media is based in this space. Most of the communication that happens goes through this interface. But the internet itself is
hardware?
No, as far as I understand it, it's a protocol for sending messages between computers, and you don't have to use the shell of the internet in order to do so, right? That's what is it, Tor? The dark web? No, that's different?
Back up.
All right.
Back up.
Tell us, Dr. Lin.
Back. So, at the very lowest level of the internet, there's hardware, there's computers, okay? There's wires, right, that plug into the wall. And they go they go into the ground, and they go to an office somewhere, and it goes into a computer somewhere, okay? At the very so there's a physical hardware level of things that you would recognize as computers, okay? Now, for these computers to talk to each other, for any computer to talk to each other, they have to, on the internet, quote, on the internet, actually more precisely, using what you call the internet protocol, they have to obey a certain set of rules. And these are all technical rules that you can only, for example, you can only send a message of 500 characters, for example. And if you want to send a longer message, you have to break it up into packages of 500 characters. Okay? And then you send it and so on. And the other guy reassembles it on the other end. Okay? And there are rules for doing that. That's what the protocol is about. Okay? And so everybody has to conform to that if they want to get service. Okay? Those rules, the protocol that I described, that's what's set up by this group of people that's anybody who shows up at the meeting. That's what they do.
They decide the protocols for packet switching and how they get routed between the different parts of the internet.
That's correct. Essentially, that's right. Okay. Now, what a company does is it provides internet connectivity, internet services to you, well, to me anyway, and to maybe someday on Mars, but not not yet. There are proposals for that. On how what you do is you set up a bunch of nodes. There are nodes within this network, and there are end nodes. Okay, the end nodes are the users. Okay, so you can imagine a dense web of connections from point A to point B, and you can get there in many different ways. Okay, but in the end, the objective is to get a message from here to here. Okay, now what happens when you talk about, quote, the web, unquote, or Facebook or something like that, all that is just some application that's running on these machines according to a certain set of rules. Okay, so there's what we have is email. There's this messages, it's a message that gets sent from here to here. You can do that, okay, because basically the internet is constructed on a basis of sending messages back and forth. But brilliance of the people who invented the World Wide Web is that they figured out a way of sending messages sort of in some sense automatically and in such a way that they would be able to communicate with each other without explicitly having to send a message. It's all done by machine now. The sending of messages back and forth is now done all by machine. Okay, and what the web does is it enables everybody who has something interesting to say to, quote, put it on the internet. What does that mean? It means putting it on one of your nodes, on a node that you grant their own, and now everybody can go to that.
Publicizing.
Find out what you want to say.
Publishing.
That's right. Now you're publishing. Okay, and so that's what the web is a set of protocols for doing this. Okay,
very easy publishing.
That's right. It makes publishing much easier. But now people have to find you.
Yep.
How do you know where? How do you know what site, what node on the internet to go to? And there's a whole set of procedures for that. And then there's a whole procedures established to find you, which is what we call search engines, and you could search for it. And if you want to, do a search on people wearing a flannel shirt and a green shirt and who are Chinese and have dark hair and so on, sitting at, etc. Maybe you can do a search and you find, then I'll come up.
Isn't there really only one search engine?
There are many search engines.
Well, functionally.
No, there are many search engines. A lot of people use Google, but there's another competitor called Bing that is.
Is it really competitive?
Isn't like 95% of traffic through Google?
A large amount of traffic in the world is through Google. That is true, but not all of it.
This is true. But so what is beyond the World Wide Web? The World Wide Web is what everybody thinks of as the internet, but that's
part
not...
of what, well, some people think that Facebook is the internet.
Well, yes, but they wouldn't be correct.
Going to be wrong, but the World Wide Web isn't the internet either.
Right, so the internet is beyond the World Wide Web. So when we're talking about anonymity, I think we're talking about anonymity online, not necessarily on the internet.
Well, everybody has to in order to get onto the internet, to do something on the internet, you have to get service from somebody. And you usually have to pay somebody for it.
Sure. But you could be anonymous through something like Bitcoin. Like if you could pay for internet service with crypto, wouldn't that keep you anonymous? And then if you had to sign up for a social media platform, then you'd have to have identifying information that would prevent you from being anonymous. And so you could have...
You could require that.
Yeah, exactly.
You could require that you present a driver's license before you sign up for a social media account.
And that way
Seems like that might slow down a lot of the...
That's right. Now you're putting a barrier in front of it. Now people don't want to do that.
But it's the same barrier they've had for 200 million years of evolution, or however long you apes have been at it.
Yes, but the whole point of the information technology is supposed to reduce the effort of doing this. That's why people do it in the first place.
But people have historically had to take responsibility for their words, right?
Yeah.
Why? Now I'm giving you a way to not. Who wouldn't want that?
Well, anyone who doesn't want to rip apart the fabric of social responsibility that's held everything together. No. I want you to not be anonymous, but I want to stay anonymous. I'm good. I'm purely good. I just don't trust you. But that's a little hypocritical, isn't it?
Who cares about hypocrisy?
What do you mean? You humans don't care about hypocrisy anymore?
No.
Wow, things have really changed.
Why would one expect that?
Well,
people behave in hypocritical ways all the time.
But they usually
deny it. They deny it, but they do. You know this.
Well, but this is the thing. There's the fact that they act in hypocritical ways doesn't mean that systems should be designed to accommodate hypocritical actions, right? Because people are always talking about this idea of where is the burden? Is it personal responsibility or is it the responsibility of the system? Do you save the planet by changing the way that you behave and you act, or do you lean on systems and expect the systems to fix the planet for you by keeping you from being able to make some stupid choice?
Yes, that I agree. I agree that is the debate, and I think the answer to that is pretty clear at this point. And you can't rely on individuals to make the proper choice.
But
that's abundantly clear.
Really?
Well, so this seems like you can't rely on the system to make the appropriate choice either.
Well, there are people, but there are fewer system designers than there are individuals. And so there's more leverage in trying to go after the system designers.
But that's a paradox, right? Because if the system designer can't be expected to do the right thing.
That's right. That's why you have to have people, that's why you have to provide them with incentives of various sorts to do the right thing.
Like what?
Yeah, what's the incentive for the sysadmin to do the right thing?
There are positive incentives and there are negative incentives. Positive incentives are things like you bribe them to do it or you pay them to do the right thing. And the negative incentives are that if you don't do the right thing, we'll throw you in jail.
But this all started from a conversation. Throw you off Twitter, yeah. This started from a conversation about anonymity on the internet and how to ensure that anonymity for reporting of malfeasance survives while your anonymous ability to harass someone to death is prevented.
Yes, but let me give you the example on this, okay?
Like, don't you want to de-incentivize cowardice?
The malfeasance that you're talking about, that I may want to report, the person who's doing the wrongdoing may feel that I'm harassing them. What do you do then?
But
you have this view that there are objective methods for telling what's harassment and what's reporting malfeasance.
Wait, you're telling me that there's not an objective measure of harassment?
No.
But it seems like a moot point because people have been policing their own language for millions of years, or as long as they've been talking.
That's right. But the difference is millions of years ago, you could only talk to a small number of people.
And they'd probably hit you in the head with a stone if you said the wrong thing.
And now when you go, that's right. And now when you go out onto the internet, you can reach a much larger number of people and you're anonymous. So you don't have to suffer the consequences of anything bad that you say.
Seems like a design issue to me.
It's hard to
I mean, I'm not sure that I disagree with you. But there are certainly people who would defend to the death the value of anonymous commentary. For example, if I want to be able to criticize my government, it's better if I do it anonymously.
But there should be channels for that outside the online world. I don't understand why there can't be two channels.
Because it can't reach as many people.
But that's an interesting point. Well, okay, but journalism still exists, and journalists. But
a journalist who has an audience of 10 is much less influential than a journalist who has an audience of 10 million.
But the person who's blowing the whistle on government malfeasance is usually not anonymous. Even so, so if you think about something like let's take Edward Snowden, right? Edward Snowden steals state secrets from his job as an NSA contractor.
He just borrowed them.
Yeah. You can't really steal stuff on the internet, right? So he borrows state secrets, sells them doesn't sell them, sorry. He shares them with a journalist, and the journalist publishes them, but they publish them under their full name. They're criticizing the government, and the journalists aren't hiding who they are. It's the source that's kept anonymous. And so if you have an audience of 10 anonymously, that's fine. You just have to reach the right journalist, right?
And sometimes the journalists suffer from protecting their sources.
Yeah, but that's the name of the game, right?
Yes, but So I don't understand what your point is. Yes, it's sometimes possible to protect people, but if I'm really paranoid about being discovered, I'm not going to let the journalists know who I am. Of course, that will destroy my credibility with the journalist.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to trust the journalist to do the right thing.
Of course.
Why can't I do that?
So it all comes down to trust at the end of the day, right?
That's right.
And so is this what you're basically focused on?
Essentially, that's right. I mean, one could say that much of my work is about trust and betrayal.
Whoa.
That's right.
Now, you started off as a physicist, right? That's quite a leap.
Well, I mean, physicists invented these fearsome bombs, and the government and my government has them, and so I have to trust that my government is doing the right thing with them to manage them properly. I'm not so sure that that some people, including me, aren't so happy about the trust that we've been forced to give them.
So should people, from what your work has revealed, is there a path to building useful trust? Like, is there a way for the amount of trust that governments have to actually be reasonable? Because it seems like reporting systems for whistleblowing on the government aren't fantastic, even in a world of anonymity, right? This question of anonymity on the internet or no anonymity on the internet in terms of reporting on the government still comes down to the fact that if you're going to report on the government, they're going to destroy you.
Unless if they can find you.
And they usually can find. Has there ever? I mean,
that's right.
As far as I can tell, there's only one bank robbery that's ever happened that they didn't find the person, right?
I am not confident in my ability to hide that anybody could hide from the government forever. That's true. I am not confident of that. That's true.
So anonymity already doesn't exist, and people are already fighting against the government in a condition of no anonymity. So we know that that's what is already the case.
Well,
so it's like, do you want a monopoly on anonymity?
I'm not sure. I think there are people who believe that they can hide forever.
Interesting. Who would those people be?
But that seems to be an unproven belief, right?
Well, I mean, there are crimes that are not solved. I have seen people leak classified information. I've observed it with my own eyes.
Whoa.
And these people haven't been caught?
In some cases, they haven't been caught. In some cases, they haven't been bothered. The government hasn't bothered to go after them.
That's interesting.
You're going to get a knock on the door in the middle of the night tonight.
But so what's the way to trust? Because that is the central human problem, right?
I agree. And I try to imagine worlds in which trust, in the sense that we're talking about, it is not necessary. That you don't have to trust enough You don't have to. You don't have to confront that choice.
That's fascinating.
Because betraying the trust is too costly, or something like that.
That's where it doesn't matter that where all you have to where it doesn't matter whether or not the other person is telling the truth or not.
How? I can't even imagine that. Can you walk us through?
Let me give you an example. Okay, let's say I'm suspicious. Let's say we're going to meet, and I'm suspicious of your intentions. Okay, and I'm afraid that you might bring a gun.
We do have blasters.
Okay, well, but let's say I have a blaster. Let's say I have blaster armor. Now it doesn't matter.
Sure. Interesting. But what if you can't afford blaster armor?
Yes, absolutely. I didn't say that not trusting is cheap.
Yeah.
I didn't say that at all.
So the poor will have to have trust, but the wealthy will be able to buy their way out of it, in theory.
Well, in general, it is true that if you want to arrange your life so that you can survive with minimal trust, then you will have to pay for it. In general, that's correct.
Fascinating.
And doesn't that prevent functionality though? Because, okay, so let's say you wear blaster armor, but then you also have to have a tremendous amount of other mechanisms for protecting yourself.
Blaster armor is big and heavy, and it's hot, and it's uncomfortable to wear, and so on.
Yeah.
So security always is more inconvenient.
Sure.
You bet it is.
So,
but sometimes that's the price you have to pay for security.
So what it seems like is what's going to happen is that people will end up gating themselves off into...
I'm sorry?
People,
doing what?
They'll end up siloing themselves into these communities on the internet and elsewhere, where it's basically there will be nodes of people that have established
that trust each other, right? Exactly. They trust each other, but don't trust the rest of the world, and they'll armor themselves against the rest of the world. But within their little enclave, they won't wear the armor.
Do you see this happening already?
Of course.
On the internet?
Of course.
So it's like a rebirth of a kind of localism or village mentality?
Yeah, like what does this actually look like?
In the limit, that's what it becomes, yes.
What does this look like that you're seeing that's already happening?
China and the United States have very different visions of how an internet-connected world should look like.
Can you elaborate on that?
China is much more sensitive as a government to the kinds of information that it will allow people to traffic in. The U.S. government is relatively free about it.
Like critical information.
No, right. Critical, yes. Critical in sense of negative. That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
But do you see it extending to a smaller and smaller?
In the limit, I can see. I think that may well be in our future.
What is that going to do to the internet, though?
Will that kill off these bigger monoliths like Google and Facebook? Or are you guys just gonna make them kings?
Or they might just arrange so that already Google provides different results in China than it does or Microsoft provides different results in China than it provides here in the United States.
Sure.
And Google's not in China, right?
That's correct.
But they tried or something like that.
That's right. They said no, we're not going to do this. Now they weren't doing very well there anyway. But
was it under the banner of some sort of national allegiance or allegiance to an ideology of open exchange?
There are many people who you could argue about why they gave up on the Chinese market. Some people, cynical people, say that it was mostly a PR game because they were losing out in it anyway. Other people say, no, it was a strong principled stand and so on. I mean, look, if you want from the American point of view, if you want to do business in China, you got to follow American Chinese rules.
Sure.
And if the Chinese rules say censor information, you either censor it or don't do business in China.
Sure.
Well, censorship of information seems to be creeping into American platforms as well,
true.
right?
That's right to a certain extent. That's
different
right.
information and for different motivating reasons, but the principle has arrived.
Right. That's right. That's right. That's right. You might, you can ask the question as whether or not it was the right thing to kick Donald Trump off of Twitter and on Facebook.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it was the correct decision. But it's very controversial.
Correct in terms of it was good for Twitter?
No, I think it was bad for Twitter, but I think it was good. I think it was good for the country.
Interesting. So you have a case where a corporation is actually acting against its own interests.
I think that's in this particular case. I think that's probably right.
Wow.
But
well, that's a little reassuring on the level of the amount of power that corporations have then, right? Because if you can see that they'll act against their own interests.
There's another question as to who elected Twitter to do this. I mean, why should a person with 66 million followers have been deplatformed?
Well, everybody who buys into Twitter by opening the app sort of puts their vote in.
Well, this is actually a fascinating thing.
No. Trump had 66 million. I think he had something like 66 million followers.
Okay, well, so hold on. This is a really interesting phenomenon because there was a right-wing YouTuber whose name was Stefan Molyneux, I think, and he had millions of subscribers on YouTube. But he was also a right-wing ethno-nationalist who was anti-woman, anti-homosexual, basically all toxic opinions that you can imagine. He was pro.
Very profitable.
Very profitable. And YouTube kicks him off, and the entire pyramid collapses underneath him. No one follows him off the platform. There's no other way that he can monetize his toxic ideas.
Right.
And so he actually had to abandon his rhetoric. Now I don't know what he does. Something.
Probably sells pills or something. I have no idea.
But what's your point?
My point is that it would appear that these platforms give home to a spectacle, and people want to use the platform for the spectacle, not necessarily because they are true followers of, say, Donald Trump's account. How many of the people that followed his account were super, super pro-Trump? And how many of them
Mm-hmm.
or even super anti-Trump? Maybe they were just like, this is crazy. You got to see what this guy's saying.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But what difference does it make? Why should they be denied the right to follow him in the first place?
Well,
I agree.
because it's trashy, because it makes the place worse.
Why? Wait a minute. You may think it's trashy. I may think it's trashy, but there may be 66 million people who don't think it's trashy.
Maybe at least think it's entertaining.
Somebody needs to look at that data to see how many of those people are ostensibly people that support the guy versus how many of them are rubbernecking the train crash.
Wait a minute. You're trying to tell me that people should make a distinction between rubbernecking and whether they're seriously interested?
Yeah, why not?
You're going to gauge sincerity of interest?
Yeah, why not? Why can't you gauge sincerity?
I don't know any good metrics for that. I'm sorry.
Well, if what you
Lack of anonymity?
Lack of anonymity? No. Lack of enmity. So, okay, let's say Donald Trump tweets something stupid or tweets anything at all, right? And you see that the vast majority of accounts, what they do is they're just using it as fuel for the fire among their own followers. They're creating spectacle. You can analyze this. You can measure using natural language processing.
How do you differentiate that from from a genuine political campaign?
Well, that's a political campaign, meaning
putting millions of dollars into TV ads or however you want to influence public opinion.
But there's this crazy thing that happens in this political world where, okay, so Donald Trump's presidency was in many ways the best thing that ever happened to TV news.
That's correct.
And so if you have the same thing that's happening on Twitter where it's the best thing that's ever happened to Twitter because people are showing up to the platform and they're just basically using it as an opportunity to
They're using it. Twitter's using it to sell ads.
Yeah, exactly. And Twitter's like, well, okay, this doesn't seem like it's good for the world. Maybe we shouldn't be using this to sell ads. We're going to stop doing this.
Well, okay, so fine. So maybe they make a decision to make less money. But that's not what capitalism is about.
How can you incentivize corporations to make those decisions to make less money?
That is the primary question, and nobody knows the answer.
But the individual responsibility, the guy who was it?
Corporations
Jack?
aren't individuals. That's the problem. They have to follow.
The guy who decided to take Trump off Twitter, I think, was the Twitter CEO. Was
I don't think
Dorsey?
he acted in a vacuum.
That's correct. And the Twitter CEO made a decision, and no doubt, I have no doubt that the revenues for Twitter went down because of it.
Sure. And he decided that there was a requirement for him to do the moral thing. He took personal responsibility.
But can most corporations be motivated by a single individual like that? Or does the CEO just get fired by the board and business continues as usual?
That's an interesting question. I would bet that it's possible. It would be possible to at least you could come up with some argument that sent him to court to say that he did not act in the best interest of the shareholders.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
You might be able to come up with an argument to say that a CEO who did that does not act in the best interest of the shareholders.
And so he could be liable or something?
That's right. No, that's right.
Right. So can you use the same courts to enforce the health and welfare of the planet?
No.
That's crazy.
There's no court that does. There's no court that will do that.
But it's strange because corporations are non-human actors, and if they're solely motivated by profit margins, and they can't be concerned with whether there's any fish left in the ocean or not, what are you guys going to do?
That is the classic dilemma of the commons, and nobody knows how to do it.
Anybody working on it? Anybody making progress?
There's lots of people who thought about this, but there's nobody knows how to do it. There are people. There is a view that says that the best thing for the planet is the sum total of what each individual wants to do. I think that's clearly wrong, but there is that view.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Before you leave, do you have do you do social media? You have a website or anything like that? If people want to read more about your ideas.
I have a Twitter account, but I only but I it's not a prolific presence.
Not on the level of Donald Trump.
I have it's Herb Lin, HERBLIN, Cyber, CYBER.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
And I'll look forward to talking with you guys again.
Perfect.
Thank you, Dr. Lin.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.